Welcome to Straight Talk Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, December 8th, 2020. Today's presentation is titled Married, Now What? This is our next installment of the Financial Wellness Series. I'm Brent Bowers, a retirement plan advisor at Retirement Plans, Inc. And this presentation has been put together with Rich Myers, a retirement plan advisor at Retirement Plans, Inc. So you may be thinking, what do I need to do once I'm married financially? And we're going to answer that today as we cover key financial conversations and considerations and planning for an addition to the family. Let's kick this off. What are the key financial considerations we need to be thinking about when we're getting married or have just been married? Like most things in any relationship, good communication tends to lead to better outcomes, and it's no different when it comes to your finances. So the first thing we want to do is to be able to open up communication around how we individually have treated money prior to our relationship and how things may need to change or what we need to do differently around our money collectively as a couple now. So questions like how much do you spend or save, how you treat your credit card on a monthly basis, are you paying that off in full? And then how do you utilize a budget if you are utilizing a budget at this point? And if not, maybe that's an important piece to start to do as you move forward from a financial perspective. The second thing, which goes along with some of those opening questions, would be to identify your combined financial situation. So understanding what assets and liabilities each one may be bringing into the relationship and how that may impact what you're able to do now financially and how you can maybe alleviate some of those liabilities if you have any outstanding debts, whether that be credit card debt, student loans, and the like. 3 is aligning on financial goals. So we really want to talk about what are our big financial goals as we kind of progress through life. That could be things such as a purchase of a home, renovating a home, your preference on vacations. A lot of families like to take an annual vacation. So that's something that we need to think about from a financial perspective, being able to support. Children or retirement savings are big topics that you now collectively will be both trying to accomplish together. Some other things to think about and to discuss is establishing a monthly budget. As we said before, if you're currently utilizing a budget, that's great, but now you've got another party that may be utilizing a budget or not, or in a different way than you have been. So how do we establish a monthly budget that makes sense for both parties and collectively makes sense for our financial goals? So setting spending limits and tracking those spending habits, and then discussing how each of us or who is in the relationship going to be handling the bills. Next thing that's really important is to evaluate your insurance. So there may be opportunities here now that you're, married or going to become married to combine things such as car insurance, which could save money collectively. Look at healthcare options. So is there a more advantageous healthcare plan depending on the employer options that are given to each one of the parties in the relationship? And then life insurance. Now that there's somebody else to think about beyond just yourself, is making sure that you have enough life insurance to cover any liabilities that may come to fruition if something tragic were to happen to one of you, and potentially setting up the other person in the relationship to be able to sustain a lifestyle for a certain period, knowing that they'll be down an income from a tragic event happening to one or the other. Second to last thing here is identifying investment philosophy. So when it comes to retirement saving or saving just in general for some of those bigger events, such as purchasing a home, we want to understand what the individual risk tolerance is for each person in the relationship. And these can vary. So there's often times we find that there may be people that have very different investment styles and preferences in a relationship, and trying to navigate those and create an investment strategy that makes sense for both can sometimes be a little bit more challenging. And this is where a financial professional can really help step in and work with both of you to identify what that appropriate path is. And then I leave this one for last because I think all these preceding questions really help answer this last one here, is on how you should handle combining finances together. Should you have a combined credit card, combining your bank account or investment accounts? And truthfully, it comes down to a personal preference, but however, it is much easier to stay in alignment or on the same page when you have accounts that are shared that may be utilized to, pay some of the bills, track certain investment accounts that may be for collective investment goals. We find that it's easier to align and keep those communications flowing when each person has access to the account. The second thing we're going to discuss here is planning for an addition to the family. So, having a kid's a big decision, a big step in life, and with that comes some financial, implications. And so what we want to look at here is what the cost is to raise a child. So looking at a study done by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we can look here that it's basically going to cost around $233,000 for the first 18 years of a child's life. And you can see here the breakdown. Housing leads the way as the biggest expenditure that we're going to need to be able to support raising a child. A couple other things here that I think really stand out is childcare and education. So we think about, whether it's, somebody to watch the child during the week while you work. So childcare, and there's some, avenues potentially there to utilize to be able to save for that. Education is a big one, especially in the U.S. right now, whether they'll be attending college, a trade school or even private school. Those are things that we need to consider when we talk about expenditures going to be needed for their education and care. So I wanted to provide some things that maybe you haven't thought of or haven't to this point discussed that you need to do prior to bringing in a new addition to the family. And the first thing I think that's important is to really adjust your budget for post-delivery changes. So, obviously when we have a kid, we're going to have some expenditures with having the kid itself or adopting. Adopting can be very expensive, up to, I think it's $40,000 now, the average cost to adopt. But then afterwards, we're going to have some added expenses, things that we haven't had before, to support that new life. So making sure our budget is accounting for those type of things. Also, make sure our emergency fund, we always talk about emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of, expenses saved up in case, there's a loss of income or a, medical hardship that's unforeseen that can really get us through for a short duration of time when we may not be able to work or have a change in our income level. Second thing here is understanding your maternity leave. So each company's maternity leave varies, and depending on the policy will dictate how much you need to save financially for that. The companies are required to give you 12 weeks off for maternity leave, but they're not required to pay you. So depending on your company's policy and how long you decide you need to have off, we'll decide how we need to plan for that from a financial perspective. Next thing here is to revisit your life and disability insurance. So as we talked about before, making sure you have enough coverage to cover your spouse in case something tragic were to happen to you. We now have another life to support. So, we may need to get some additional coverage to be able to support financially the kids, as well as potentially set them up to cover some of those, educational costs or things of that nature if you're no longer around to be providing another income for the family. We talked about some of those things for healthcare and potentially for childcare that may be available for some of you. And an FSA or an HSA, depending on your employer and your healthcare plans and what they would offer, may be a really good way that are tax advantage for you to help save for some of those expenses. So now that you've had the child and it's a new addition to your home, what are some of those important things that you need to discuss or take action on? First thing here is obviously adding your child to your healthcare plan. That is usually you have 30 days to do so. Second thing is to adjust a state plan or begin one. So once the child is born, you want to ensure you have defined guardianship in case of tragedy. So in case if something were to happen to both of you, who would take guardianship of that child up until they're an adult? So really establishing a will or working with an estate planning attorney would be really important. So that way you can ensure that your child's taken care of if something were to happen. And then obviously updating beneficiary information. This is something we forget to do, and it's really a bad thing that we forget to do it, but we want to make sure our beneficiary information is always up to date. So I always recommend, at least once a year, make sure the beneficiary information, both primary and secondary, is up to date and the most accurate. So that way that if something happens, your money's not tied up in probate or there's not confusion and potentially, family feud around how those assets or things should go to who. And then last thing here is planning for education. We all obviously know education costs continue to rise, whether that be private school, attending college, but a 529 plan, for example, is a very good vehicle to start to save just because the growth and distributions are tax-free when used for qualified education expenses. And really there's been some changes in legislation that's opened this up a little bit more broadly too. Which is really good news for families that are trying to save for education. And this is where your financial professional can help you navigate what would be appropriate for you within, saving for that education expense. If you have questions or need help in establishing a budget or questions around saving for retirement collectively together, or even opening a 529 plan to support education for your children, please feel free to reach out.